The Price of Freedom. The underbelly of Ironspire was alive with the hiss of steam and the hum of machinery, a place Tala knew well. She moved silently through the shadows, each step careful and calculated, her senses on high alert. In the low light, her emerald eyes seemed to flicker with an eerie glow, a subtle reminder of her psionic power, ever present but always tightly controlled. She thought on her narrow escape many years ago from Exarch hunters, and her fingers brushed the faint scar tracing her right temple to her cheekbone. Tala's gaze swept over the darkened streets, filled with grit and grime, so different from the sleek towers above. Ironspire's underbelly, below the vaunted Spire district, but before the underground mining shaft turned dwellings known as the Hollows, was a place she had come to accept as home, a hiding place for those the Exarchate had labeled as threats. As she passed a broken wall sprayed with graffiti, shining with holographic overlays, she felt a stirring of the old anger, the one she had tried to keep hidden beneath her calm leader's exterior. Life as a psionic is a journey, she reminded herself, echoing the teachings of the way of the eternal voyage. Every trial, every loss was just a step on a longer path. She kept moving, the cold pressing against her skin, sharpening her resolve. When she neared the alley, her steps slowed, and her expression hardened, the weight of her role settling on her shoulders. Here she was more than just Leira Valen. She was a leader, a rallying point for the resistance, a symbol for the psionics who had nowhere else to turn. She couldn't let them down, even if every loss, every choice tore her apart. Leira Valen moved silently through the shadows, her steps deft, senses razor-sharp. Even in familiar surroundings, relaxation was a luxury she couldn't afford. Ironspire's people were skittish these days, and with good reason. Whispers drifted through the alleyways like smoke, rumors that the Exarchate of Voth was tightening its stranglehold on the rimward independent states. Worse yet were the tales of Dominion activity creeping along the fringes of explored space. She'd been too quick to dismiss those once, but now they felt all too real. Her pulse quickened as she neared a dimly lit alley, its depths cloaked in thick shadows. A huddled group waited there, those gifted with psionic powers to manipulate minds or toss around barrels with a thought. These were refugees from the Exarchate, clinging desperately to the hope of escape from its iron grip. As Tala approached, a man stepped forward. He was older, his once dark hair streaked with silver, his face lined with worry. "Tala," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. His name was Jorn, a former Exarchate telepath who had narrowly escaped the Phoenix Accord's Inquisition. The Inquisitors knew no boundaries when it came to hunting telepaths and their like. Tala had run into them on more than one occasion in Ironspire and abroad. The Phoenix Accords thought that purging anyone with psionics was protecting all of explored space from the disease which had ravaged the ancient star empire of Calron, where abilities had led to an imperial state lasting 1,000 years or more, and the deaths of billions of souls across countless worlds. It had been almost that long since the Star Empire fell, but fears of those who were different still lingered. "They're scared," said Jorn, interrupting her thoughts. "Word is the negotiations are advancing. If they hand us back, we're done." Tala gave him a short nod, her emerald eyes scanning the tense faces around her. She wanted to offer comfort, but deep down she shared their fear. Negotiations between the RIS and the Exarchate had intensified over the past few weeks, and now, with the Exarchate's most ruthless hunter, Ethan Var, the newly named ambassador to Ironspire, the talks were moving at a dangerous pace, too quickly for her liking. "They won't extradite you," Tala said, keeping her voice steady, though her thoughts churned with doubt. "I won't let that happen." Jorn's eyes searched her face, and he nodded slowly, but the flicker of fear remained. Turning away, Tala's mind raced ahead, her thoughts shifting to her next steps even as painful memories lingered. She led the group of renegades through the winding maze of Ironspire's streets, her senses heightened despite the heavy throb at the base of her skull. It hit her suddenly. a sharp, flaring pain that spread like fire behind her eyes. Her implant was malfunctioning again. She winced, bracing herself against a rusted wall, as a familiar surge of disjointed thoughts crashed through her mind like an uninvited storm. Her implant, the AI symbiote forced upon her by the exarchate when she was just a child, seemed to shudder within her, pulsing with static. Unlike others in the exarchate, her relationship with her AI was fractured, twisted by years of rebellion and reprogramming. Where most citizens, the bonded, shared a seamless connection with their AIs, Tala's was a cracked mirror, a bond warped by trauma and mistrust. Growing up, she had heard the same stories everyone had, about the ceremony of bonding and the so-called gift bestowed upon every child. The exarchate celebrated it as the ultimate act of unity, a merging of flesh and code meant to bring enlightenment, aligning each citizen with the divine algorithm, a cosmic code that bound everything together. In theory, the bonded saw this as the first steps towards understanding universal knowledge, becoming a single part of the collective consciousness of the exarchate. Her experience had been different. The ceremony of bonding was less a gift than a binding, a sentence. Her AI had been forcibly integrated, a measure of control and surveillance imposed to ensure her psionic abilities never strayed beyond what the exarchate deemed safe. The AI's guidance had felt like a chain around her mind, always suppressing her thoughts, redirecting her anger, quelling her instincts. It wasn't a companion, it was a warden. Exarchate were not the benign entities they appeared to be. They were extensions of the ruling exarchs themselves, a quiet, watchful presence that observed every thought, every impulse. The exarchate claimed that each AI was unique, shaped by its host's experiences, personality, and spiritual path, eventually growing into a lifelong companion, confidant, and guide. Citizens spoke with their AIs as if they were family, as if these unchained AIs were beloved, trusted friends. They took pride in the synaptic harmony they had cultivated with their bonded AIs, even embarking on synaptic pilgrimages to deepen the communion with the so-called divine. But her AI had never been a trusted friend. When she joined the psionic underground, she had fought hard to override its protocols, twisting its purpose from control to empowerment. Resistance tech experts had stripped away layers of surveillance, but the core programming remained. Sometimes it even resisted her, detecting her emotions and reacting on its own as it did now, the old control routine stirring as her anger surged. She took a steadying breath, trying to wrestle her mind back into focus. Even as she channeled her psionics, trying to tamp down the feedback loop that surged between her and the AI, the pain intensified. Control versus freedom, she thought bitterly. The exarchate never gave me a choice. Most bonded citizens believed their AIs were liberating, helping them reach enlightenment and align with the divine algorithm. They were convinced that their thoughts were their own, unaware of the subtle reins their AIs held over them. For her, the implant would always be a reminder of the exarchate's grip, of a freedom she'd had to claw and fight for, of a destiny she'd been forced to shape for herself. Clenching her fists, she forced herself to block out the buzzing static and focus. I will control it. It won't control me. She pushed off the wall, her vision clearing, but her resolve only hardened. Ironspire's embassy district stood in stark contrast to the underbelly Tala knew so well. The streets were immaculate, lined with gleaming surfaces and meticulously maintained gardens, giving the area an unnerving sterility. The exarchate's compound loomed ahead, a fortress of sleek metal and glass, guarded by sentinels outfitted in dark armor and glinting under the harsh artificial lights. Their inspections were impassive, yet their eyes tracked every movement with cold efficiency, making it clear no one entered without purpose or consequence. Inside the compound, Ambassador Ithan Var sat at a pristine negotiation table, his gaze sliding lazily over the tense faces of the RIS representatives across from him. He exuded an unsettling calm, his smooth, unruffled features revealing none of the tension simmering in the room. The RIS officials, visibly divided, whispered to one another in low voices, yet Var observed them with the poised calculation of a predator assessing its prey. Ambassador Var, the RIS simply cannot hand over people to the exarchate, one of the officials finally spoke, her tone tight with restrained anger. We have agreements, alliances, and those psionic refugees are under our protection. Var's smile was polite, almost indulgent, though it failed to touch his eyes. Of course, but you must understand the importance of maintaining stability. These refugees are volatile. Many of them are untrained. Left unchecked, they could pose a considerable threat to both our governments. Another official leaned forward, his hands steepled on the table. And what assurance can you offer that there won't become of the exarchate? Var's smile broadened, smooth as silk. The exarchate's only aim is to ensure their safety. Our methods may differ, but we share a common goal: peace, stability. His voice was a carefully crafted melody, each word delivered with deliberate calm, though his mind was already racing through the next steps of his plan. These negotiations were merely a charade, a convenient distraction. Behind the diplomatic facade, a larger operation was unfolding. Every delay granted his Dominion allies more time to maneuver into place, drawing the RIS ever closer to a checkmate. In the lower depths of Ironspire, far removed from the embassy district's polished veneer, Tala stood in a dimly lit room, scrutinizing a hollow map of the exarchate compound. A faint blue glow bathed her face, casting shadows that accentuated her determined expression. Beside her, Rekka, her second-in-command, leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, her gaze as cold and calculating as the dim machinery surrounding them. "We need to move tonight," Rekka said, her voice blunt, practical. "Var's tightening the screws. If we don't hit him now, we're out of options." Tala nodded, her mind already a few steps ahead. "We go in quietly, take him down, access the symbiote AI, and pull whatever intel he's hiding. If we can expose him, we can shut down those negotiations before they go any further." In the corner, Joran, the youngest member of the team, shifted nervously, casting between the hollow map and Tala. "Do you really think it'll work?" Her gaze hardened, her voice a low promise. "It has to." The weight of their mission hung heavy in the silence that followed. There was no margin for error. The night was quiet as Tala and her team approached the exarchate compound. The movements silent, practiced. They drifted like shadows through the deserted streets, slipping past the sparse patrol still lingering on duty. Rekka led the way, her steps precise and deliberate, her figure merging seamlessly with the darkness. Tala followed close behind, keeping her focus sharp despite the ever-present strain of her malfunctioning implant, its ache pulsing faintly at the base of her skull. As they neared the compound's perimeter, Rekka signaled for a halt. Ahead, 2 guards stood at their posts, weapons glinting under the cold, artificial glow of the compound's lights. "Joran, you're up," Rekka whispered, her voice barely a breath. The young psionic stepped forward, his expression tightening in concentration. He closed his eyes, and for a brief moment his face was a mask of focus. Slowly the guards' posture softened. Their heads dropped as if under an invisible weight. A few moments later they slumped to the ground, unconscious, leaving the path ahead clear. "Let's move," she ordered, her tone firm but quiet. Tala and her team slipped past the compound's perimeter, their movements honed and quiet. They were shadows moving through steel, drawing closer to Var's private chambers. Tala clenched her jaw, feeling the familiar weight of her implant pressing at the base of her skull. Even now, after all these years, it was a shackle as much as it was a tool, a reminder of the exarchate's attempt to control her. They had never understood her potential, only seen her as a threat, but this time she would turn that threat back at them. When they finally reached Var's quarters, Rekka raised her weapon, and Tala gave her a brief nod. She took a breath, steadying herself. The cold beneath her calm exterior, but she forced it down. She couldn't afford to lose control. As the door slid open, Tala caught sight of Var sitting calmly at his desk, the faint hint of a smile on his lips. "Leira Valen," he said smoothly, as if he'd been expecting her all along. She glared, her fingers tingling with suppressed energy. In that instant, flashes of memory assaulted her. The extricate forces breaking down the door, the terror on her parents' face, the sharp sting of her AI symbiote being wiped and reprogrammed like a chain wrapped around her mind. She clenched her jaw, pushing the memories back, forcing herself to focus. She reached out with her psionics, attempting to break through the calm facade of Var's mind, but her implant's resistance kicked in, tugging at her power, holding her back. The AI within her flickered, sending waves of static through her mind, trying to suppress the urge she was drawing on. Damn this thing, she thought. The extricate would never let her live without a leash. Her pulse thudded in her ears, and she felt a rush of anger, resentment at being so close and yet still restrained by their technology. But she couldn't afford to let her emotions take control, not with her team's lives on the line. She needed a clear mind, needed to keep her rage in check. Var's voice cut through the concentration, condescending and cold. "I must admit, Tala, I didn't expect you to fall for the bait so easily. You've always been so predictable." She bit down her reply, channeling her frustration into a steady glare, reminding herself why she was there, why she could never stop fighting. The confrontation. Her team surged forward, dismantling Var's guards with practiced precision. In moments, Var was on the ground, his hands bound, his face betraying not a hint of fear, only the same unnerving calm. Talia knelt beside him, her heart pounding as she prepared to access his symbiote AI. Her fingers twitched involuntarily as her implant surged with fresh pain, but she forced herself to push through it, focusing on the cold barrier of Var's mind. "Whatever you're after, it ends here," she hissed, her voice edged with restrained fury. Var's response was a low chuckle, filled with condescension. "You think you can stop this, Valen? You're already too late." As he spoke, her implant flared, flooding her senses with a torrent of distorted data. For a split second her vision blurred, and then, like pieces of a dark puzzle snapping into place, she saw it. Disjointed images flashing before her eyes. An incoming fleet, covert agents already embedded in Ironspire, and RIS defenses compromised from within. A cold wave of horror swept over her. Her breath caught as the implications crystallized in her mind, each one heavier than the last. "Dominion," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Var's grin widened, a twisted gleam of triumph in his gaze. "That's right. The Exocet isn't the only one with interests in Ironspire. The Dominion of Cauron has already set things in motion. Ironspire will fall, and there's nothing you or your precious RIS can do to stop it." Talia stumbled back, her implant flaring painfully again, nearly blinding her. Her mind spun, trying to grasp the enormity of his revelation. This wasn't just a political maneuver. It was an invasion, carefully orchestrated, a deadly gambit already in motion. If Var was telling the truth, the Dominion's forces were already here, silently eroding Ironspire's defenses from within. They were days, perhaps hours, from an attack that could topple the city and shatter the fragile alliances that held the Rimward states together. She steadied herself, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to waste another second. As the pieces clicked into place in her mind, Var's expression grew almost gleeful, savoring the helplessness he saw flickering across her face. "You see, the negotiations were never about psionic refugees. They were merely a distraction, a convenient excuse to place Dominion agents close enough to disable Ironspire's defenses from within. By the time your RIS friends understand what's happening, it'll be far too late. The fleet is already en route." Tala's hands trembled as she stood over him, her mind reeling from the enormity of the betrayal. The Dominion, every bit as ruthless as the Exocet, if not worse, was poised to strike, and Ironspire was woefully unprepared. They'd all walked into this trap, eyes wide shut. But before she could react, Var's face twisted with a smug, sinister satisfaction. "But don't worry, Valen. You won't live to see the aftermath." A thunderous crash suddenly shattered the tense silence. The wall behind them erupted inward with an explosion of dust and debris. Tala staggered back, her vision clouded as dust billowed around her, thick and suffocating. Through the haze, a towering silhouette emerged, each step the murk with terrifying purpose. Thraxar, also known as Ironclaw, stood at an imposing 6'6", a figure who seemed to absorb the dim light around him. His left arm, a sleek cybernetic limb gleaming with amplifiers from his home in the collective of Null. His remaining eye, a piercing emerald green, bore the hardened edge of someone who had seen the worst of war and chosen to embrace it. In battle, he was relentless, his moves calculated with the precision of both a strategist and a telepath. To him, each mission was just another contract, his loyalty bought by the highest bidder. She tightened her grip on his sidearm, knowing that Thraxar's mere presence was as much a threat as the cybernetic arm at his side. Rekka moved to draw her weapon, her reflex. But Thraxar was faster. In a single fluid motion, he crossed the room and swung his cybernetic fist, striking one of the team members with a sickening crunch. Bones shattered, and the impact sent the body crumpling against the wall. Talia's heart pounded as she activated her own psionics, reaching out to Thraxar's mind, desperate to find a weak spot. But his mental shields were unyielding, fortified by layers of cybernetic enhancements that amplified his already formidable defenses. Each attempt to breach his mind hit an impenetrable wall, the feedback jolting her with each failed attempt. One by one, her team fell around her, their defiance no match for Thraxar's brutal efficiency. Every counter, every attempt to strike back was met with unrelenting force. Within moments, they lay scattered, their resistance crushed, the room thick with the acrid scent of blood and scorched metal. Var rose, dusting himself off with a look of disdain, as if the chaos around him was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Excellent timing, Thraxar. It seems we have much to discuss." Her pulse raced as she looked at the grim scene, the cold truth settling in her mind. There was no way out, not without reinforcements, and certainly not with Thraxar standing in her path. Her gaze locked onto her, pinching precision. This wasn't just a failed mission. It was the beginning of something far worse. She forced herself upright, her vision clearing as she steadied her trembling legs. The room around her was a battlefield of broken bodies, scattered debris, and the lingering stench of scorched circuits and blood. Thraxar stood amongst the station like a statue of death, his cybernetic arm casting an ominous glow as he surveyed the scene with cold detachment. Nearby, Var completed his final commands at the console, extracting data and slipping a small drive into his coat pocket. His smug satisfaction cut through the tension like a blade. Talia's mind raced, the full scope of their betrayal sinking in. The Exarchate's negotiation ploy had been nothing but a ruse, bait to lure her and the RIS into false complacency. Now Ironspire's defenses lay exposed, with Dominion agents infiltrating the city from within. Soon the Dominion fleet would descend, catching the city unprepared, and Var would walk away, his plan fulfilled. Var turned to her, his condescension almost palpable. "I must say, Talia, I didn't expect you to fall for the bait so easily." His voice dripped with scorn. "You've always been so predictable, so blinded by your righteous little crusade." She clenched her jaw, her anger burning away with pain. She wiped the blood from her lip, refusing to show any sign of weakness. "You think you've won," she spat, "but this isn't over. The RIS will respond. Ironspire won't fall as easily as you think." Var chuckled, straightened his collar with deliberate ease. "Ironspire's already falling, Valen. You're simply too stubborn to see it. By the time the RIS grasps what happened, the city will be ash, its defenses scattered, and you, well, you'll be long gone." His words sent a chill through her veins. The Dominion, It was apparent now that the Exarchate had joined forces with the ruthless expansionistic nation and was preparing an all-out assault. Every step of this so-called diplomatic process had been calculated misdirection. The peace talks, a cloak of war. Var gestured to Thraxar. "We're done here. She doesn't interfere with our departure." Her pulse quickened. She was out of time, out of options. But she wasn't dead yet. Before she could make her move, Thraxar closed the distance between them, his bulk blocking out the dim light. The hum of his cybernetic arm was like a low growl, and the faint psionic energy crackling beneath the surface made her skin prickle. "Don't bother, Thraxar," called as he moved towards the exit, his tone dismissive. "She's of no consequence. She'll die with the rest of the city soon enough." Talia glared at his repeating her mind racing for a way out, a last shred of hope. If she could escape, even reach someone on the outside. But Thraxar's towering form blocked any path forward, his gaze fixed, impenetrable. "Your loyalty surprises me, Thraxar," she said, her voice low but edged with contempt. "I didn't take you for the type to work with those who'd see our kind enslaved." For a moment his gaze flickered, his cold blue cybernetic eye glinting with a hint of something deeper. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a hardened expression. "I work for whoever pays me, Valen. That's all." "Even if it means betraying your kind?" she pressed, her voice sharp, almost daring him. Thraxar's face remained unreadable, his eyes dark with something like resignation. "I don't pick sides in your war," he replied, his tone as distant as steel. "This is business." She saw an opening, a flicker of doubt in his otherwise impenetrable expression. She leaned into it, desperate. "How long do you think it'll be business, Thraxar? The Dominion won't stop with the Ironspire. They won't stop with RIS. They'll keep spreading until there's no one left to pay you, no one left to fight them." His jaw tightened ever so slightly, a faint reaction, but a reaction nonetheless. "You don't have to be the weapon," she pressed, voice fierce with the last remnants of her strength. "Help me stop them. Walk away from this, Thraxar. Stand for something other than your paycheck." Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. His cybernetic arm powered down slightly, the faint hum dimming as his gaze held hers, searching, perhaps, wait. Finally he spoke, his voice low and unreadable. "You have 10 seconds to get out of here, Valen." She blinked, stunned. "Thraxar, 10 seconds," he repeated, his face hardening again. "Don't waste them." Her heart sank as she realized any hope of appealing to Thraxar's conscience, if he even possessed one, was a lost cause. He was a mercenary to his core, indifferent to the politics and moral struggle that consumed her life. He moved only for profit, a force of nature unleashed by whoever best. Var's voice pulled for thoughts, crisp and dismissive. "Come, Thraxar, we have a ship waiting to take us out of here before the real fun begins." Thraxar turned without hesitation, his massive form moving with disturbed fluidity as he followed Var out. She watched them go, her vision swimming as pain flared at the base of her skull, her impulse flooding her senses as she staggered forward, her only thought to reach the console Var had been using. Whatever Var had to find a way to warn Ironspire. As Var and Thraxar left, she stood in the silence, her breaths shallow and ragged. Her fingers found the console, her only hope of warning Ironspire, even as her skull throbbed in time with the pulses of static from her implant. She leaned heavily against the console, trying to clear her mind enough to focus. Her fingers flew over the keys as she worked, and she couldn't stop the memories from surfacing. The faces of her fallen comrades, the realization that her plan had failed, that she had led them to this. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of every decision, every life she'd asked to risk. "This is my burden," she told herself, echoing the teaching she'd held on to long ago when she was a child. "Every step is just part of the journey." The console confirmed the transmission sent, and her shoulders sagged with relief. But it was short-lived. Outside, the ground rumbled, and the distant roar of explosions reached her ears. She looked out through the fractured window and Dominion warships lighting up the dark sky, casting eerie shadows over the city. Ironspire was burning, and she was trapped inside the chaos. Forcing herself to her feet, she stumbled towards the exit. There would be time to mourn her fallen team later, but not now. She had to survive, for their sake, for the Resistance, for everyone who had looked at her as a symbol of hope. She had made mistakes, had underestimated Var's cruelty, but this wasn't the end. I won't let their deaths be for nothing, she vowed silently, a promise she kept close to her heart as she pushed forward. As she stumbled into the corridor, the distant roar of engines grew louder, and the darkening heavens were filled with the looming shape upon the city. Her comm device crackled to life, breaking through her haze of pain and exhaustion. A familiar voice, rough, detached, cut through the static. Thraxar. Valen, he rumbled, his tone neither mocking nor concerned, more a simple observation. You're not dead yet, are you? Tala froze, her heart pounding. What do you want, Thraxar? Nothing from you, he replied, his voice almost bored. Just thought you should know. I've got another job to attend to. Dr. Solan's calling for assistance. Something about a Dominion force tearing through her defenses. Her hands clenched into fists, fury sparking in her chest. Thraxar's allegiances shifted with the wind, and now he'd accepted a contract from Dr. Zainara Solan, a rogue geneticist infamous for her unethical experiments. Solan, who had once worked for the less savory groups within the Solar Syndicate, was now entangled in the very invasion tearing Ironspire apart. You're working for Solan? She hissed, her voice light with anger. What does any of this have to do with her? Not my concern, Thraxar replied flatly. I go where the credits take me. Even if it means aiding a mad scientist who probably deserves death? Like I said, Valen, this is business. Her rage simmered, her vision narrowing as she thought of the devastation Solan could wreak on Ironspire and Dominion, with Dominion backing if they were truly after her. Solan was a wild geneticist unbound by any ethical restraint, who had sold herself out in the Solar Syndicate under those same forces, had turned against her, forcing her to Ironspire in hiding and exile. If the Dominion was after her, it could only mean trouble. Thraxar, she said, her voice cold and steady, when this is over, when you realize the kind of destruction you've unleashed, remember that you had a choice. Remember that you could have stood for something other than your own greed. A pause. Then a faint scoff on the other end of the line. Sentiment doesn't win wars, Valen. It only gets people killed. The connection cut out, leaving Tala alone once more. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the throbbing in her skull as she stumbled towards the compound's exit. She had to get to Ironspire's command center, warn them of the betrayal within and the nightmare about to descend from above. As she staggered into the chaos of the streets, fires lit the skyline, and the blaring of sirens filled the night. Dominion ships hovered ominously overhead, launching precise, destructive strikes. Somewhere above, the Dominion and their twisted ambitions lurked, and she knew that stopping them was a losing gamble, but one that might still save. All she could do was move forward, each step carrying her deeper into the heart of a war she was only beginning to comprehend. There was a pause from Thraxar.